I want to go to the Ken Wilber books, and I want to see how he treats the psychic state and the psychic stage. It has changed over time, undoubtedly, and it has to change over time because it's evolving rapidly. We're going to look specifically at Ken Wilber's earlier, middle, and later books, and we're going to kind of see how the treatment of this psychic realm or these psychic bands changes over time. To be fair to Wilber, not because his opinions change so much as the cultural opinion changes. The progress is being made. We're going to kind of find that in earlier Ken Wilber works, he gives a lot more leniency to what we would now consider paranormal, occult, spooky stuff. In more recent times, he's also had kind of resurgences of this. He will validate or legitimize somebody who basically does something magical, something that like, oh, I've never heard of a human being able to do that. If someone caught that on camera, it would be amazing. If they showed it to James Randi, they would get $1 million for that. Mostly, Wilber does not do this. Mostly Wilber is representing scientific skepticism because that needs to be in place in order for you to start legitimizing state practice and saying, okay, well, what actually is real about this stuff? Higher mind, human potential, what actually is real? I'm a scientific skeptic. Don't waste my time with voodoo or whatever. I want to just know, this is the world that I live in. It's rational. Nothing ever disproves rationality, science, ever. And maybe we have a narrower, limited view of that, sure. But never is it the case that the laws of causality are outright defied. I've never witnessed it. I've never heard a compelling case for anybody witnessing it. So that's the position I hold, and I'm sure that a lot of you also hold that position. If you hold a different position, I'm open to that, and I'm curious what is compelling you to believe in things that you could get $1 million to prove from James Randi. Why would you not claim that money and also prove to the world that you were right all this time? That makes no sense to me. Thus, I think it's a perfectly fair argument to say the psyche has different rules. Just as personae have different rules from egos, psyche has different rules. The psyche is non-rational. It's not constrained by rationality. This is from 1980, The Atman Project by Ken Wilber. This is a book that kind of tells you how to develop from a first-person perspective. But again, 1980, so keep that in mind, Let's just skip to this part here. We're talking about Sambhogakaya. That's the Buddhist term, but also the technical term he's using for the subtle realm. For convenience sake, we speak of the low subtle and the high subtle. The low subtle is epitomized by the Ajna chakra, the third eye, which is said to include and dominate both astral and psychic events. That is, the low subtle is composed of the astral and psychic planes of consciousness. Whether one believes in these levels or not, this is where they are said to exist, or rather where they are said to reach maturity. The astral level includes basically out-of-body experiences, certain occult knowledge, the auras, true magic, astral travel, and so on. The psychic plane includes what we would call psi phenomenon, ESP, precognition, clairvoyance, psychokinesis, and so on. Many individuals can occasionally plug in to this plane and evidence random or higher than random psychic abilities. But to actually enter this plane is to more or less master psychic phenomena, or at least certain of them. So again, 1980, and I think that we're still taking kind of occult and paranormal more seriously back then. And so what he's really saying is that level 9, or the psychic state, is where we would place all of these things. And you can argue whether auras, what the meaning of auras is, what the meaning of telekinesis is. Siddhis, I'm overpronouncing it, so I'm not saying cities. Siddhis are sort of like high Buddhist powers that have been witnessed and observed, not scientifically, but by pretty credible witnesses. So I'm not saying these are unreal to you. That's what I would assume that they mean something slightly different than what we're all thinking. Because again, I don't believe in miracle or anything like that, even for the most. Like James would say that the sun didn't work the same way for the Buddha as everyone else. That's disappointing. right? That the shadow of the tree stayed on the Buddha so that he could attain enlightenment. I like a Buddha who's in the beaten hot sun, like me. That's a Buddha I can relate to. So yeah, understanding that probably those mean different things to these people than they do to us. But I will say that I don't personally believe that literally anyone can like levitate, because James Randi would give them $1 million to do that, and anyone could use $1 million. Like, who you kid yourself? Telekinesis. Now, uncontrolled clairvoyance, maybe something like that. Maybe some people get these gut feelings, and maybe they're actually touching into things that they've noticed that they don't really realize they've noticed. We know that we repress a lot of information. So maybe some of these things that look miraculous are actually just us revealing truths to ourselves that we were not able to see before, that may appear to others to be some sort of magic or gift or miracle, when really it's just sort of human genius. The crazy ability of the human mind. That's what I'm going to say in response to that. Now, I'm going to say it's so important to, when I'm discrediting things, to give credit to the things that are real. Astral travel is real. Now, it won't say anything. It'll say something on my brain scan, but it won't say a spirit came out of my body. But I've done this. I've left my body and floated around and left and got. It's not that hard to do. You read a book on it, you'll do it. Like I don't know, maybe that was how it was for me. It was pretty straightforward. And I was prior placing that in the same category with like levitation and telekinesis, things like that. And then you do it. It's like, okay, no idea what happened, but my soul left my body. I was able to see my body. I was able to move around the room. People talk about this happening all the time in medical situations. It's the thing a lot of people can do. Astral travel doesn't mean anything to a scientist, really. It's just a brain phenomenon, a psychological phenomenon. But to you, from your perspective, yes, you leave your body, you float around, you go do stuff. And that's like undisputed to me, because I've done it. And this is the same thing with like these states and stuff. It's like you really can't, it's always just one person's word against another with this stuff, and unless you've had any sort of like state. Why would you believe it? This is your question. This is a question for you. I believe it because I've had some of these states, and the stuff that I don't believe is stuff that I've never seen. I've looked for evidence of paranormal and occult and not found it. So that's my opinion on that. And it's probably Ken Wilber's opinion on that most of the time. But in some of his works, you will see that. Have you heard Eye to Eye? There's also 80s, kind of trying to expose integral theory to like the intellectual community, sort of what the book is. Almost without exception, some lower structure, such as magic, has been and still is confused with some similar appearing higher structure, such as psychic. And then either the former is elevated to the latter, or the latter reduced to the former. In other words, the pre-trans fallacy. These PTF confusions are summarized in Figure 7. There's Figure 7. We've already seen examples of primary matrix spirit pre-trans fallacy and of body-mind pre-trans fallacy. As for the others, a few brief comments. Magic, or unrestrained and unrefined belief in action at a distance, characterizes the thinking of 2 to 4-year-olds. Principally because they cannot yet distinguish image from reality or symbol from thing, hence believe that to manipulate the one is to manipulate the other. This mode can sound very holistic and holographic and all that, until you really dig into the actual case details. Then you realize that magic does not unite subject and object, it fuses and confuses them. And it does not holographically integrate whole and part, it simply can't tell them apart in the first place. It's pure voodoo and hokum. I'm being rhetorical here because I haven't space to give details. But I am confident that the simplest study of any good developmental psychologist, Werner de Arrietty de Piaget, will disabuse anybody of the notion that childhood magic is some sort of heavenly holographic display. Nonetheless, magic is almost always confused with psychic, or the actual display of some sort of transcendental vision based not on the fusion of subject and object, but on the beginning transcendence of subject and object. This pre-trans fallacy, of course, goes both ways. Freudians claim all psychic is really magic, and parapsychologists occasionally rig up elaborate laboratory experiments in an attempt to prove that magic is really psychic. A similar confusion seems to exist with regard to myth and archetype, and here Jung apparently stands most to blame. So, okay, I've addressed most of this already, right? But here again, this is a pushback to what I was saying earlier. Like Wilber in the 80s as well was very scientific rational. He's very poo-pooing on fake psychics, magical hokum, right? But to say that there's something there also, clairvoyance. This is an annoying thing, the treadmill of terms. Like, I guess, like, precognition and clairvoyance these days, like when Teal Swan says them, mean something different than what everybody knows them to mean, which is magic powers. So that's a little annoying, but I will try and adopt those, the kind of new way these terms are used, because I think it's actually useful. It is just, it's a little, yeah. So the psychic self, here I am including the centaur and the low subtle as one general level. So stage 8 and 9, one general level, the psychic level. Psychic does not necessarily mean paranormal, although some texts suggest that certain paranormal events may more likely occur here. Yeah, I like that. Rather, it refers to psyche as a higher level of development than the rational mind per se. So again, ego, psyche, right? E.g., Aurobindo Dafrijan. Its cognitive structure has been called vision logic. Oh, I haven't brought up vision logic, yeah. Or integrative logic. The sixth chakra, the beginning of manas, Mahayana, in Mahayana Buddhism, and Vijnana Makosha in Vedanta, it is correlated with Lovinger's integrated and autonomous stages, Maslow's self-actualization needs, Broughton's integrated stage, and so on. And then subtle's the archetypal level. Okay, so that's just a description of the psychic as vision logic or levels 8 and 9. That's another way of breaking it. That's another line of development that has been investigated, and they call this thing vision logic. You can, whenever we say psychic, you can just think vision logic if the term psychic is problematic and you think paranormal. We're really not trying to say paranormal. Psychic is a good word, though, because it just means pertaining to psyche, right? It's like the perfect word. It's just that it's been abused. So here's a description of vision logic. Same book. We're still in eye to eye. Vision logic. Where the formal mind establishes higher and creative relationships, vision logic establishes networks of those relationships. The point is to place each proposition alongside numerous others so as to be able to see or to vision how the truth or falsity of any one proposition would affect the truth or falsity of the others. Such panoramic or vision logic apprehends a mass network of ideas, how they influence each other, what their relationships are. It is thus the beginning of truly higher order synthesizing capacity, of making connections, relating truths, coordinating ideas, integrating concepts. It culminates in what Aurobindo called the higher mind, which can freely express itself in single ideas, but its most characteristic movement is a mass ideation, a system or totality of truth-seeing at a single view. The relations of idea with idea, of truth with truth, self-seen in the integral whole. This, obviously, is a highly integrative structure. Indeed, in my opinion, it is the highest integrative structure in the personal realm, gross realm. Beyond it lie more transpersonal developments. So again, in early Wilber, we're seeing this sort of like sometimes more paranormal. I think he's just trying to include that when it was hot, right? But overall, it's this idea of vision logic. It's this idea of the mind starting to see psyche, of the ego starting to see psyche, and the psyche starting to awaken itself as an entity, as an agent. This is from one of my favorite Wilber books, No Boundary. No Boundary is sort of a pop reading guide to how to transcend, basically, Eastern and Western approaches to personal growth. And we're talking about Jung here. In this context, in his early work, he referred to this as transpersonal bands, and therapies approaching vision logic would be transpersonal band therapy. The aim of some types of transpersonal band therapy, such as Jung's, is therefore to help us consciously acknowledge, befriend, and utilize these powerful forces instead of being moved by them unconsciously and against our wills. So it's a lot like what I'm saying. In as wankish as it is, man, I'm talking about pine cones and stuffed animals here, right? Consciously acknowledge, befriend, and utilize powerful forces instead of being moved by them unconsciously and against our wills. We'll get into that. Simple magical practices. Not magenta, but magic of consciousness, psyche. You might, for example, have a key dream where the central image is a sphinx, a gorgon, a great serpent, a winged horse, or some other mythological material. Through a little study of ancient mythology, you can easily learn what these mythological images have meant to the human race on the whole, and thereby discover what these images mean to your own collective unconscious. By integrating this meaning into your conscious awareness, you are no longer forcibly controlled by it. The depth of your soul thus begins to loosen, and the crusty topsoil of normal egoic or centauric awareness begins to gently break apart to allow a growth of the transcended, a growth of those processes which transcend your personal life, but which are nevertheless aspects of a deeper self. There we're really talking about Jungian practices, and again I was saying, those sort of get you through psychic subtle sort of stuff. So this one is Integral Spirituality, also a great read and appropriate for our audience. It's sort of just a textbook on integral spirituality. So this is around 2006. This is, this is quite a bit later now. From the last stuff I was reading to you, where it was sort of, a lot of the terms hadn't been laid out, but it was essentially the same vision. Here we're going to start talking about types of mysticism. Nature, deity, formless, and non-dual mysticism, the 4 categories corresponding to psychic, subtle, causal, and non-dual. These are very loose assignations, but nonetheless quite useful, something I have added to the original Wilber-Combs lattice. The basic idea is that in each of the 4 major natural states, you can have a peak experience or intensification of that state. One of the ultimate peak experiences in any realm is to be one with the phenomena of that realm. To experience a oneness with all phenomena in the gross waking state is a typical nature mysticism, psychic mysticism. To experience a oneness with all phenomena in the subtle dream state is a typical deity mysticism. So it's kind of weird, right? That subtle is both lucid dreaming stuff and deity meditation stuff, but it's the same deal. It's dreaming while awake. To experience a oneness with all phenomena, or lack thereof, in the causal unmanifest state is a typical formless mysticism. So this is what the Om, this is just pure consciousness causal. To experience a oneness with all phenomena arising in gross, subtle, and causal states is a typical non-dual mysticism. So it's oneness. It's all about this oneness. What is oneness? It's identity, right? It's like I have oneness with Adam because I'm an ego. But do I have oneness with the universe? Do I really think I'm the universe? That would be like sort of a non-dual. Or it'd be all of them, really, because the universe can mean a different thing at every level. Again, the brainwave stuff, I've covered that pretty well here. All this stuff that I talk about with the brainwaves is that's all in here as well. And I want to remark just a little bit, look how little. I mean, I'm picking out of this whole book, I'm picking out like a paragraph, and there's really not a whole lot more on vision logic, psychic, indigo. It's pretty minimal, because Wilber just wants you to be familiar with this, and if you want to pursue those practices, go study Kundalini, go get a guru. That's what we're saying. This isn't where we teach you the material in any particular context. We're just saying that it exists. So notice how very little he says, and that gives us very little to work with, and that's probably good. We probably don't want to pack this in too deep. Just real simple. Just keep it real simple. Integral Meditation. This is a fairly recent book, if I recall. This book weirded me out. It's like you meditate on the level. Such a strange concept. So 2016, yes, 10 years after the other one, last one I read. Integral Meditation. What do they say about psychic? So in this context, he's just calling it level 8, white, which would be like our clear light, but it's the whole 3rd tier. Super integral 3rd tier, that's what he's saying. In this book, it's all squished together because it's for a meditation audience. It doesn't need to be too technical. Squishing together is perfectly fine in integral. Spectral. Now, although the integral level is essentially the very leading edge of today's development and evolution, there are actually still more levels on their way, for the simple reason that there are no signs that evolution stops or will ever stop. Accounts vary as to how many truly higher levels there may be and exactly what their characteristics are. But given the nature of evolution, namely, it is an endless affair, constantly going beyond what went before, we would certainly expect to see evolution continue into the future. Based on evidence from visionaries such as Sri Aurobindo, he talks about him a lot, who is trained, that's integral yoga, who is trained in Western modes of evolutionary thinking and thus had at least some sense of structure stages, that's these states as traits, as well as various types of early research, I believe we can postulate up to 4 major 3rd-tier stages. So this is kind of where he's building them in the first place, which I call indigo, paramind, so like parallel running along with mind, seeing mind, violet, meta-mind, meta being transcendent to, seeing mind, violet, ultraviolet, overmind, so just not even mind anymore, just consciousness of mind over it, and white, supermind. It supersedes everything. Mind comes into all states. So again, this is where he's defining indigo, violet, ultraviolet, and white, which later became clear light, I do want to emphasize that the sum total of individuals at any of these third-tier structure stages today is, I would estimate, 2016, considerably less than 0.1%. If you are at the integral stage, you are pragmatically at the leading edge. And of course, as such, you will be open to the emergence of third-tier levels as you continue your growth and development. So yeah, there you go. That's interesting. This book, I was like just saying I thought it was weird and I was making fun of. This is where he was like building the third tier of stages. So there you go. This is the Aurobindo terms, and they're actually Wilber Aurobindo. I don't really find these terms laid out in the same way in Aurobindo's actual work. Paramind, metamind, overmind, and supermind. Kind of tough. It's not that tough, but in the early days of my channel, I was using those descriptors and I liked them less and less. I think that what Wilber's done to Aurobindo's work is definitely better than the work. I'm glad that they both exist because Aurobindo's so deep and layered and powerful and comprehensive, but Wilber's distilling of it is pretty essential. It's really hard to read Aurobindo's work. This is the Integral Vision. It's just kind of a little coffee table quick book, fully illustrated. I think I bought it so that other people would get interested in Integral if they were at my house. But so kind of interesting to see, in a snapshot, in a landing page, what would you say about this stuff? What are some typical spiritual states or peak experiences in the waking state? A quite typical one is that you are walking in nature and you have a peak experience of being one with all of nature. Call that nature mysticism. What is a type of spiritual state or spiritual experience in the dream state? You might be dreaming of a great cloud of luminous, radiant love, and you might even feel that you are becoming one with that infinite love. Call that deity mysticism, subtle. With reference to the deep, dreamless, formless state, is it possible to have a spiritual experience focused on that? It appears so because some spiritual or religious experiences are described as empty, formless, unmanifest, the void, abyss. Call this formless mysticism. We also call it causal mysticism, after the causal or formless state itself. Finally, there are quite common experiences of flow states where an individual feels one with everything that is arising in any state. Call that non-dual mysticism. You can have any of these spiritual state experiences at virtually any stage of development. Yeah, so those are the basics. You can wake, dream, and deep sleep as in consciousness. It's pretty simple, really, and it's so funny that until now we haven't been able to use such simple terms to talk about something that's really so simple. It's just that we're so entrenched in culture and ego that it's like this stuff gets hard to see. AI has no problem with mysticism, real mysticism. Finally, this is my last Wilber book that I actually just have at my house. Integral Buddhism. I did a review on it. I did my best. Bookmark 2 entries. So this is specifically in the context of Buddhism through Integral. So there's a lot of lenses on lenses. Beginning with the third tier paramind, whenever you experience that structure, you also implicitly or intuitively understand or experience the gross realm as objectified, which means that state is intimately connected to the structure at this level, which gives rise or can give rise to expanded states such as nature mysticism. This can be experienced at earlier levels, but not inherently, and is interpreted according to the views of those lower levels. So there it is right there. This can be experienced at earlier levels, but not inherently. Very important, and is interpreted according to the views of those lower levels. So this is kind of what I was saying, you have to hack into states from lower stages, but in third tier, they're just natural. They'll just happen because that's the way forward. But at this level becomes an inherent potential. Likewise, because of the conjunction with the gross state, this level often carries variations of the realization that the physical world is not merely physical, but is rather psychophysical in nature. So that's psychic level in a nutshell. This can also evoke flashes of higher state presences, such as witnessing states or even non-dual, and so on with the subtle state and metamind, causal witnessing and overmind, and non-dual suchness and supermind. Those states are all minimally connected to those structures, in the sense that, for example, a person at metamind might have already and previously moved his or her state center of gravity to subtle, but if not, the person cannot proceed beyond the metamind without doing so at this point, and likewise with causal witnessing and overmind, and non-dual suchness and supermind. The difference between supermind and big mind, if we take big mind to mean the state experience of non-dual suchness or turiyatita, is that big mind can be experienced or recognized at virtually any lower level or rung, magic to integral. In fact, one can be at, say, the pluralistic stage and experience several core characteristics of the entire sequence of stages, gross to subtle to causal to witnessing to non-dual. Although, of course, the entire sequence, including non-dual suchness, will be interpreted in pluralistic terms. This is unfortunate in many ways, interpreting Dharma in merely pluralistic terms or mythic terms or rational and so on, because it is so ultimately reductionistic, but it happens all the time given the relative independence of states and structures at first and second tier. He's talking about alternative Buddhist teacher Genpo Roshi's big mind process, and this is, no matter who you are, you come into this process, it's like a therapy process, and you just kind of like in the moment, you erase this identity, you become another identity. One of those identities you become, or many of those identities, are these state structures. Like you can just have that state experience, supposedly using this process. I'm assuming it takes a while. I've done it a little bit. I do other practices. It's not my main squeeze. But in that, you're only going into that state, and everything that happens, you're interpreting from your level that you're at currently. It's not going to get you up to that structure. So it's just pointing out. It's more pointing out. Genpo Roshi's Big Mind. Check it out. I might do a video on that itself. It's a very fascinating dialogue process. And it seems pretty effective in terms of recognizing states. But yeah, then you need to also realize them fully into all your lines. And Calvary's here too. Yeah! Yeah! Namaste to you, friends. I'll see you next time.